Hello, welcome to Leaders in Literacy presented by Lindamood-Bell. Today's webinar is the first in a series where we will be presenting and featuring leaders from across the country sharing their stories about successful school transformation and increasing literacy for all students. My name is Tom Mendoza. I am the co-director of Lindamood-Bell for Schools. Since 1986, our organization has been working with students with language and literacy difficulties and researching the factors that contribute to success in school. We believe passionately that all students in schools can be taught to read and comprehend to their potential. Our research verifies that sensory cognitive functions are the critical factor for successful school achievement. Quickly on the agenda, I'm going to spend some time with an introduction talking about what the primary cause of success or failure is in schools. At that point, I'll also present our process-based education model that we work closely with school districts to implement, and including what our Lindamood-Bell professional development model looks like. And then at that time, I will be turning it over to our featured guest for this series, and that will be Mr. George Welsh, who is the Superintendent of Canyon City Schools. So really, over the past 30 years, we have worked with students of all ages and backgrounds. They've come to Lindamood-Bell experiencing failure and frustration in school, and we really wanted to ask the hard questions about why did some students succeed and others did not? What were the factors that contributed to their success or not? Was there a primary cause of weak language and literacy skills? And if there was, what was the instructional solution? So over the years, really that has been our interest in asking and answering those questions. And then beyond that, from a research standpoint, could we provide instruction and deliver it within a sustainable professional development model for schools? Some questions that I'd really like you to consider as we go through this presentation today. Why could some children easily learn to read from an early age, yet others could not? What were those factors? Why did some children decode below their potential, unable to catch up despite years of special education or reading programs or even private tutoring? Why were some students analytical readers rather than global readers, even after completing phonological instruction? And I think today that's a really important question and factor, especially as we're now turning our attention more to students with disabilities such as dyslexia. We know that students with good interventions and strategies can become good analytical readers and learn how to break down words, but how do we get them to become global readers at a more independent and fluent level? Questions we continued asking and answering over the years. Why did some students struggle to memorize sight words? And here we're now kind of drilling down in terms of some of the details in the reading process and instructional strategies, but that's a very specific part of reading. And why could some students do that well while others struggled? Was it just a strategy? Was there something else going on there? Why did some students read text easily and maybe even early in their experience, yet not understand what they read or easily recall those details? So what was the primary cause? And you might be thinking about answers now in your experience. Did it have to do with IQ or ethnicity or minority status, effort? Well, we found that really at a primary level, at the sensory level, there were factors that were contributing to these issues. And when I talk about the sensory level, I'm talking about how the brain can only process sensory information. Some students have strengths in sensory processing while others do not, for whatever reason. Could be a biological factor, it could be they lacked some instructional techniques early on to develop those processes, or a combination of both. But at the sensory level, we found that students were struggling because of those issues. Your students may have weakness in what we call sensory cognitive functions, and just to go through a couple of quick definitions. I'm sure most, if not all of you, are aware of that first term, phoneme awareness, which is simply the ability to perceive the identity, number, and sequence of sounds within words. This is a well-known factor, a well-known sensory cognitive factor. This is something that's happening in the brain. We know that this is a primary cause of dyslexia or a general reading difficulty despite adequate language and intelligence. A couple of other factors, though, that we've really been interested in have to do with imagery. And these are also sensory cognitive functions that load your ability to read and comprehend fluently. Symbol imagery is simply the ability to create a mental image for sounds and letters within words. We know that good readers and spellers have good visual memory for words. So if I say the word, for example, laugh, you should conjure up an image with the letters that are associated that word. And especially in the English language, where you know that there are so many non-phonetic spelling patterns, that's a very important skill for automatic word recognition and reading fluency. Another sensory cognitive factor is concept imagery, and that's your ability to create an image gestalt of language, both written and oral language. And as you're reading, you're creating a movie in your mind, if you will. And that allows you to connect to the language, to recall the facts, to get the main idea, to think critically about that information. And again, we know that those functions, at least in our experience in our research and practice, are at the foundation of all language and literacy development. Really think of those as needing to be in place for students to then attend to an adopted curriculum or a reading strategy or method. So we call that process-based education. Really simply put, process-based education puts those, makes primary those sensory cognitive factors in terms of an instructional approach. In our process-based education model, we assess, we develop, and we apply the imagery language foundation for learning for each and every student. Instruction brings that sensory information to a conscious level for each student, not assuming that every student will naturally develop that skill. And that can be done in a classroom setting and certainly in a targeted or an intensive intervention setting. Process-based education differentiates instruction to develop and apply sensory cognitive processing to all learning, including language and literacy skills. What might be a little bit different here is that it does not focus on content first. It focuses on stimulating those skills and then applied to content. And we have seen countless times and research showing that process-based education results in closing the achievement gap for subgroups of students. And how we've done this in our professional development model is explicit training in our sensory cognitive methodologies. We've done this on a large scale, district-wide, and certainly in school settings. Beyond that, we have seen that a comprehensive job-embedded professional development model helps to increase program fidelity and sustain that training over time, that experience over time. That also includes implementing it within a professional learning community. We also provide online self-paced courses where professionals can continue their advancement and development in these methodologies. And we know that assessment and grouping of students according to their language and literacy needs has been an important focus for increasing achievement on a large scale. This is all done within a response to intervention model through all tiers of instruction. In many cases, our first approach might be addressing the more significant needs at a Tier 3 or Tier 2 level, where we're doing targeted and intensive intervention for your neediest students. But certainly from a comprehensive standpoint and a professional development standpoint, really applying the methodologies and and support across all tiers of instruction, we have found that to be the most successful implementation plan, literally having all professionals speaking the same language in terms of their instructional approach. So at this time, with that background in terms of our process-based education model, I am truly honored to introduce to you Mr. George Welsh. I had the privilege of first working with George in 2010 when he was the superintendent for Center School District in Center, Colorado. He and his leadership team invited Lindamood-Bell to propose a school improvement plan for their elementary school, Haskin Elementary. We got to work immediately, and it was apparent from day one that George's leadership team was committed to significantly improving reading proficiency. The transformation that took place at Haskin was nothing short of phenomenal. In only 2 years, Haskin third graders improved from 28% proficient in reading to 76% proficient. In 2014, Mr. Welsh was named Superintendent of the Year by the Colorado Association of School Executives. He was honored for his visionary leadership in transforming low-performing schools, particularly those with high rates of poverty and minority status. Currently, Mr. Welsh is the superintendent for Canyon City Schools in Colorado. Through an early literacy grant, the district is focused on Lindamood-Bell's process-based instruction model and intensive professional development for staff. And one final note, in his spare time, George is known to compete in Ironman triathlons. So George, welcome, and thank you for sharing your story with us.
Tom, thank you for that nice introduction. It makes me sound like a pretty good guy, especially that whole triathlon thing, which I'm not quite in shape to do that at this moment in time, thanks to a new hip that I got back in September. Would like to talk to you a little bit about what we've done in Haskin and actually what we're doing here in Canyon City, Colorado, and a little bit more about me. So, you know, 9 years as a middle school social studies teacher. I was in Arizona, spent 18 years as superintendent of schools in Center, and I'm almost through my third year here in Canyon City. Hopefully I'll survive it. But a total of 31 years in education business, but really the best of them in about the last 8. And I think a pretty good little story to start things off. I know a kid who was a student at Haskin Elementary School in Center, Colorado. Her name is Priscilla Welsh, and the daily routine I have right now in Canyon City is I get the job of driving her to school, still probably for another month. By the time she comes back to her sophomore year next year at Canyon City High School, she may be driving herself. So it's one of the true pleasures I have every day. And she has 2 things she asks me every day. One is silly, is did you sleep all right? Yeah, I slept all right. I was pretty tired after an exhausting day yesterday. And then, what are you doing today, Daddy? And today it was, you know what I get to do? I get to film a webinar for Lindamood-Bell to talk about the success we had in Center schools and the things we're doing in Canyon City right now. And it never even occurred to me. She said, well, you better talk about how it helped me. Because Priscilla had, I would guess her condition was struggles with phoneme awareness. From the moment she was born, her mother read to her every day before, you know, even you could expect that she would understand it. And by the time she got into second grade, the first year we began the turnaround work at Haskin Elementary School, she was a horrible speller. She was a horrible reader. She was a horrible writer. And what we certainly discovered through the process is her struggle was on the dyslexic end of the spectrum, in that she couldn't string the letters together and pronounce them to make sense. And we're talking a kid nowadays who scores at the high proficient end of all state assessments in reading and writing. The work that she did through Lindamood-Bell absolutely transformed her life. And I'll talk a little bit about how we got there. So let's talk about Center schools. I don't know what your challenges are where you work, but we're talking a district with about 700 kids, greater than 90% poverty. At the time we were doing this work at Haskin Elementary School, the school district and center had the highest poverty rate in the state of Colorado. 95% minority population, most all Hispanic, but with that also came recent immigrant Hispanic population, and we literally had 50% of our kids somewhere on the English language learner spectrum for the whole time I was there. I don't know what you measure your career in, but after I had been superintendent of schools for about 13 years in center, woke up one day to be recognized for having produced one of the bottom 5% schools in the state of Colorado. Haskin Elementary, as a result of that, qualified for a turnaround improvement grant. And for a community that's very poor and struggles with resources, this was both extremely embarrassing but great news, because we finally got some support, some financial support to turn things around. This slide labeled the bottom 5% school shows you what a bottom 5% school looks like according to the state of Colorado. We use a thing for accreditation called School Performance Framework, and you can see the date on this is 2010. And this information came out in October-ish, maybe early November of 2010. And you can see that Haskin Elementary School scored 25.1%. On its school performance framework. And let me tell you how this thing works. You score below 37%, you're considered a turnaround school. You can score 25% just by giving enough of your kids the test. And so beyond having given our kids the test, what you can see is we earned 1/10 of a point on top of that. And you see that our academic achievement did not meet state standards, our academic growth did not meet, and our academic growth gaps, the difference between certain categories of kids was extremely lacking. And so that is how ultimately a school in Colorado is labeled as a bottom 5%. Where do you go from there? Well, after picking your pride up off the floor and welcoming, I guess the way I would describe it is sort of as we felt like a truckload of money being backed up to the parking lot and dumped in our laps, we decided that our greatest task in center schools was to invest that money wisely, determine why we were struggling the way we were struggling, do the things that research shows you can do to change your outcomes, and most importantly, that when the 3-year process of the grant was done, to be left with something at the end, because we knew the financial resources wouldn't be there. And this is the journey we took. In doing a root cause analysis, what we understood was that well, though under my leadership in the district, we've been plugging along for 13 years, came to realize that we didn't have an administrative staff that was strong enough at identifying what good literacy instruction looked like, as well as math and every other content instruction, and also how to identify good techniques to teach your teachers to use, to hold them accountable for using them, to come out with better results. A big part of that was we'd been in an ever-ending cycle, and ask yourself, is this happening in your district? We were creating curriculum for about 5 years by the time this thing hit. And I remember being in a meeting at the time, Haskin was identified as a turnaround school, and saying, so when does this stop? At what point do we kind of put the stamp of approval on this thing and say, this is the curriculum we're going to teach, and let's do it well going forward? And so this was a big aspect of the work we did going forward from this point. Here's another thing that happens, and maybe this is your circumstance if you're in a high poverty district with extreme academic achievement challenges. By being high poverty and by not performing very well, you tend to get a lot of opportunities to bring in grants. And in Colorado, prior to this turnaround improvement grant process, what we had experienced in Haskin Elementary School was the Colorado Reading Excellency Act grant, which dumped a bit of money in our system, in which we trained our teachers to support kids one-on-one in a reading acquisition process. It was called CLIP. We participated in a Read to Achieve grant in which we were given some other resources and training, and that's how we tried to approach teaching literacy within the school. And we'd just come off of Reading First, folks might remember this back at the early part of the century, in which we'd gone through another round of training. And would certainly blame leadership to some extent, because we didn't know how important it was to hold folks accountable for following each process with fidelity. But what we really ended up with was a cadre of teachers who were trained in multiple ways for students to acquire literacy skills. And so we were just confusing the heck out of students at this time. What did we do? I call it a speed dating situation. We went up to Denver, and I recall it was the Monday after Super Bowl Sunday, which was a difficult time to have to travel to Denver. And we got to meet with a bunch of potential turnaround partners. And in the process, I recall being in a meeting with Lindamood-Bell, where we all got our eyes open quite a bit about what actually gets done through the Lindamood-Bell learning process. We learned that it's scientifically proven and very prescriptive process for helping kids acquire higher level literacy skills. And I think I'll even go into my little story about my hip replacement to explain what I mean by this. And think about what your system might look like. What we'd been doing forever in Center was we could identify kids who were struggling readers. The state test could tell us that. We could do, we were doing NWEA testing at the time. We could tell based on that. There were a lot of assessments we would give that could tell us that we had some kids who struggled reading. What we couldn't do was get down to the actual diagnosis. Was it phoneme awareness? Was it symbol imagery? Was it concept imagery at the time? So what would we do with a kid who was struggling reading? We would pull them out of another content area, or keep them after school, or require them to come in the summer, and we would address them in smaller groups, and we would do the exact same thing we were doing in the regular classroom. Just more of it, and maybe in smaller groups. And what we found is we got virtually no results, and you'll see some slides later on that indicate this. Go back to my hip. It was about a year ago I started noticing I was having some numbness in my upper left leg, and my left knee hurt like heck. And I had a memory that back as a sixth grader, I slid into second base wrong, and I broke my knee. My kneecap ended up on the side of my leg and had to be fixed. And so I'm a 53-year-old guy at the time, and I think, well, that old knee injury is coming back to haunt me. And so, obviously one thing I could do, just like we were doing with reading, is I could just take a lot of ibuprofen and let the pain go away. Although that wasn't going to actually get to the root cause of what I was dealing with. My assumption was something was wrong with my knee, and so I went to see an orthopedic surgeon. And my expectation was that they were going to point an x-ray machine at my knee to figure out what was wrong with my knee. Well, instead they asked a bunch of questions. They took a bunch of tests, and then they aimed the x-ray machine at my hip. And I said, well, whoa, the knee's a little bit lower there. What are you doing? They said, well, based on all the symptoms you're talking about here, we think there may be something wrong with your hip. And sure enough, the x-rays came back that I have an arthritic condition that caused bone to be hitting bone within my hip, and that needed to be addressed. And wham bam, within about 3 months, I got a new hip put in. My knee pain's gone. The numbness in my upper left leg is gone. And, well, gosh, through scientific process, they addressed the problem. And I know that sounds like a long story, but the question I ask you, is the reading intervention process you use so detailed that it figures out what's going on in a kid's life as far as reading, and actually addresses those issues? And that's what we found Lindamood-Bell offered at the time we agreed to partner with them. So what did we do after the partnership was struck up, we agreed to train every teacher in Haskin Elementary School and most of our paraprofessionals. In fact, in the long term, it was our paraprofessionals who probably became the strongest interventionists going forward. After training, right after training, we didn't send all our teachers home for the rest of the summer. We immediately put them to work doing the intervention through a Lindamood-Bell Summer Academy. And so teachers come out of one deep week of training in the Lindamood-Bell processes and are immediately applying those processes with a coach looking over their shoulder, making sure they're doing it well, supporting them, getting them better. And I'd never worked with a process in education that did things that way. As we went into the next school year, we were able to arrange our schedule to offer interventions for students during school and after school. We had this turnaround improvement grant money, and that helped us do that after school. And as we went further in time, year 2 and year 3, we began to support teachers who were naturally starting to do it because they'd been trained and they saw how it was working in intervention groups. We supported them applying their skills that they learned with the Lindamood-Bell process to first instruction. And that meant when they saw kids struggling decoding a word during class, they were able to go back to those rules and skills that they were using in intervention, but do it in front of the whole class. And how does that help a kid who's struggling reading when they're sitting in an intervention and they're being taught certain strategies to move forward, and then they hear that echoed in their class? And so that's what implementation looked like at Haskin Elementary School. You might ask, what was the result of this? And I know this is a quick trip through 2 years. Remember when I said we had flat line achievement? Well, we actually had worse than flat line achievement. We dumped a lot of money into Haskin Elementary School to help with our reading processes over a number of years, and all we saw was reduced achievement leading right up to 2010. The 2011 result, you got to remember, 2010-11 was the year that we were awarded the grant and we got to plan what we'd do the next several years. And so even by spring 2011, nothing had changed at Haskin Elementary School. And you can see we were on a downward trajectory, one of the bottom 5% schools in the state of Colorado. After 1 year of learning this new way to support our struggling readers, and remember, we're talking 90+% of them free or reduced lunch, 95% of them minority, roughly 50% of them English language learners. We saw, I mean, we thought we'd hit the jackpot in 2012 by our bump going up to 41% proficiency on the old TCAP CSAP reading assessment in Colorado for our 4th grade level. And by 2013, and something I'd like to proudly say, that is Priscilla Welsh's cohort when she was in 4th grade. By 2013, I hope that makes you tingle because it just did me. 75% of our 4th graders were reading at the proficient level as measured by TCAP CSAP in the state of Colorado. How significant is that? I believe it was 73% was the state average achievement for that year. And so we went from a bottom 5% school in terms of reading performance, in terms of all performance, in 2 years to performing at state level average. And as I like to say to some people, there'd be a lot of districts in Colorado, I know, that would be disappointed if they dropped down to just 2 percentage points over state average. But for us, it was an incredible transformation, and to me, an example of we were on the right track doing the right work. I like to show this slide as well because the school performance framework in Colorado isn't just about reading. In fact, the 2 subject areas that are most important on the school performance framework, was actually 3 at the time, was reading, was writing, and was math. And so the question you might say is, well, how did you move out of this turnaround category? You can't do it by improving reading alone. And so what you see is a chart that looks pretty similar, same grade level, ultimately same cohort in 2013. And without a focus on math other than, okay, we've got a curriculum we're deciding to teach and we're teaching it well, we got the same exact kind of bump, and maybe even to a greater extent. Why? If you ask, well, if you've looked at modern reading or math assessments, it's not just about computing numbers. When we took those assessments back in our day, we just were left with a bunch of numbers in front of us and we computed them. Modern math assessments are about problem solving, and that requires the ability to read. And so the ability of our students to read at a higher level easily transferred over to how they performed math, because now they could understand the problems they were being asked to solve. This slide shows, as a result of that performance in spring 2013, that Haskin Elementary School went from 25.1% score on Colorado's school performance framework, the lowest possible achievement or accreditation category you could achieve, within 3 short years, to performance, which is the highest accreditation rating you could achieve in Colorado as an individual school. So what happened at Haskin Elementary? If you go a little bit deeper, from 2010 to 2013, Haskin outperformed the state in closing the achievement gap. Something this slide doesn't show is that in terms of closing that achievement gap, bringing kids closer to state average performance, we gained 23 percentage points, 70 percentage points, 23 total points in closing that gap, while at the same time the entire state of Colorado did make improvement, but only closed that gap by 15% or 5 points. So from 2010 to 2013, Haskin fourth graders grew 57 points in reading proficiency, as I said, eventually eclipsing the state average. This is a very powerful story here. Our English language learner qualifying students improved from 15% to 52% proficiency over the same time. If you've ever been on SchoolView, the Colorado Department of Education SchoolView page, you'll find that there are some bubble diagrams that you can pull up, and you can compare multiple school districts in performance. Remember, we had about 50% English language learner population in Center at the time, and a large portion of those children would meet the definition of migrant, meaning they were coming to the community to work agricultural jobs or jobs that their parents to support agricultural jobs. They were there for less than 3 years, and they were likely in and out. We had a lot of kids who would come in and out even over the course of 1 year. And I don't know how well you can see this particular chart, but if you see the little point that comes out of the bottom of that window that says Migrant Center 26JT, what you have is the growth percentile of Haskin Elementary, of Center School's migrant population, at the 77th percentile. All those other bubbles on that chart are all other school districts in the state of Colorado that have enough migrant students to actually get a growth percentile. And you can see that if you can imagine what it looked like when Secretariat won the Belmont Stakes back in his Triple Crown year, where there was like only him in the picture, and all the other horses lengths and lengths behind. That's exactly what Center's kids, migrant kids, did that particular year in growth. We far outgrew the rest of migrant students in the state of Colorado, and I would completely, in reading, and I would completely attribute this to the good work we did with Lindamood-Bell. A little bit more about Haskin, if you can see this. I know this chart's pretty small, but what you have in front of you is the first Turnaround Improvement Grant cohort in Colorado. And what you can see is the school districts where they were, and what you can see as you go through the chart, you can see the growth in proficient and advanced performance. And if you look at Center, the third line down, Haskin Elementary School, dollars invested in the award over the years, and where we were by 2012, we only had 41% proficiency, but we had a 75% growth in proficient and advanced, or we had 75% of our students scoring proficient and advanced, a 47.6% point change over 3 years. And if you want to go that column, you get down to Mesa County had a 27% increase, and Westminster Adams 50 had a 26% increase. But once again, in terms of dollars invested in schools in Colorado at this time through this Turnaround Improvement Grant cohort, we made the most growth in the shortest period of time. And the question you might ask yourself, any of those districts on the left-hand side, did they implement the Lindamood-Bell learning process? And the answer is no. The only one that did, the common denominator there is Center Schools did so. So for those of you who lead a school system, you know, what I showed you through those school performance frameworks was what the impact was on a single school of the work we did there. Question you might ask if you're a superintendent of schools or a district office leader is, what impact did this have on the school district? Well, at the same time we had a turnaround elementary school, bottom 5% school in the state of Colorado at Haskin. Center Schools was accredited with priority improvement, and if you can see that little chart to the left, you can see that it's a step above a turnaround plan, but this kind of achievement as a school district in Colorado puts you on the accreditation clock, and that means the Colorado Department of Education gives you 5 years to change what you're doing to get a better result. And ultimately, if you do so, you get off that accreditation clock and you get to have more control about the things you do in your school district. At this time, we scored 46.2%, and that put us within the accredited with priority improvement plan category. By the time we get, and I jump ahead to 2014, because it ultimately took us till 2014 to achieve this result, but the entire district moved up from a priority improvement plan on the accreditation clock to full accreditation in Colorado, above a 64% rating. Well, and I believe to this point still it's the only school district in the state of Colorado with over a 90% free or reduced lunch population that achieved full accreditation status. And so not only did it impact our elementary level and our performance, but the overall performance in the district. And especially as kids started trickling up into middle school and eventually high school, it changed our whole, the whole way that the Colorado Department of Education looks at us. Remember, we were talking about the growth gaps. This is a piece of the school performance framework. It wasn't on that front page that I shared you. In 2010, you can see what our growth percentiles were at Haskin Elementary School for reading. And you can see that we did not meet free reduced lunch eligible students, students with disabilities, English language learners, all the way down the line. And you can see our growth percentiles on the far right were in the 30s, 39, 39, 39, 38. What I tell anyone who knows anything about school performance frameworks, if you want to be a turnaround school, have about 30th percentile growth. That'll get you there. 2014 school performance framework for Haskin Elementary School, a different story. Not only did we meet the growth requirements for the state, we exceeded. And you can see those percentiles are 63, 62, 64, 67. I don't know what more information I can give you to show you how real an impact this had on students in Center, Colorado. In 2015, I made a real difficult decision. After 19 years in Center, Colorado, 18 as its superintendent of schools, 13 of those as a miserable failure, but 5 of them turned out pretty good, and especially the last 5. I felt I was ready for a different challenge, a little bit of a larger district, and Canyon City Schools, which has just under 4,000 students, appealed to me because I felt like, based on what I saw going on here, I might be able to offer something for them, because they were in a similar spot to where we were in Center in 2010. And so what I'm sharing with you here is a performance framework report for Canyon City in 2011. And you can see they were just like Center. We were just like Center schools on the accreditation clock with a priority improvement plan. This was our performance framework based on spring 2016 results. 2017 results actually gave us a little bit of a higher score, but by 2016, after 1 year of Lindamood-Bell implementation, we actually advanced. We had made it to improvement and actually advanced to accredited after 1 year of working with Lindamood-Bell to focus on our most challenged readers. And how do we know that Lindamood-Bell had any kind of impact? What you can see on this chart is the CMAS ELA, English Language Arts, data for the district. And I'm sorry, I got to move some things so I see it better. You can see the top row is English Language Arts, and you can see the growth we start displaying in our students, from all students, from free and reduced lunch eligible. Gifted kind of stays flat. We'll cut them some slack since they're performing well above state average. Our minority students, which we don't have many, but most importantly, and the Lindamood-Bell implementation year is the last bar on the right, our students on IEPs. Our focus in Canyon City Schools was to bring in Lindamood-Bell strategies and apply them first and foremost to kids who qualify for special education services and Title I services, and that's where we've been doing those interventions. And by the way, do you notice that the kick we got from special education students also landed on math, just like it did in Center, and also lands on science as well. When kids can read and decode the questions being asked in those areas, they can exhibit performance at much higher levels. So I think anyone who's viewing this webinar wants to say, okay, so really, how does this work? And I think it's clear that I'm a fan of Lindamood-Bell and the learning processes that they teach us, but I think Lindamood-Bell will tell you this as well, that it doesn't work this way in every school district. And what's the difference? What was the difference in Center? What's been the difference in Canyon City, Colorado? And I really feel like it's a simple formula. The question you got to ask yourself when you're leading a school system is, where on the important list of things should teaching kids to read at a proficient level fall? And when I came to Canyon City in the summer of 2015, we had virtually no dollars. We're a floor-funded school district, no override. And we had been freezing teacher salaries for 6 years because of the recession. And I saw our data and said, well, we've got to do something different here. And then I would sit around my cabinet, my leadership team, my team of directors, and we would talk about whether we could spend a few dollars on this and a few dollars on that. And the question I had to ask them was this: where do you think, in the scheme of all the things we're doing in this district, we ought to place reading as far as importance? Teaching our kids who are most struggling to read to get to grade level. And I was really hopeful that the folks would put it in the list of top 5 things, but we kind of ranked it at the top. And so, living in a district of very limited resources and having to make many hard decisions every year, what we did is we put teaching kids reading at the top. And so we invested dollars that we didn't have for a lot of other things we would like to do in the direction of making sure we could teach our kids to read at grade level, to support our most challenged readers. And so the place to start is to put reading as priority one. It affects math performance. It affects science performance. It affects social studies performance. It affects a student's ability, a child's ability to be successful for the rest of their life. Other aspects of what I do, and once again, I feel like these are very fundamental things. Make sure your teachers know what they're supposed to teach, have a guaranteed and viable curriculum, and get them the resources they need to teach it. And I know we all struggle with accomplishing these things in school districts every year, but it seems like every 4 years we buy new basketball uniforms, so why aren't we doing this stuff as well? Number two is focus on good quality first instruction. Lindamood-Bell interventions are fantastic. They're phenomenal when you're also using those strategies in front of the whole class, because as I said before, you have that common language for kids. But the other aspects to that, whether you're teaching math, whether you're teaching science, whether you're teaching whatever, does the teacher know what they're teaching and how it's going to be measured, whether students learned it or not? So we focus on learning targets that answer the question, who, the student, will do what, exhibit what skill, how, in what way. And that applies to reading and it applies to every subject. Number three for me, in terms of why I think we've been successful across 2 districts, is constant teacher feedback. The culture in Center, Colorado in 2012 was we would come in at the teacher's invite, sometimes once every 2 years, because that's what the state law in Colorado required at the time, to do an evaluation. And it's been a long time since I've been a teacher. In fact, I like to laugh. I haven't actually taught K-12 education since last century, and we're pretty deep into this one. But I guarantee you, if my standard was putting on one good performance every 2 years, I wasn't being held accountable for good quality instruction. And what we learned back in 2010 is we need to be in classrooms every week, sometimes multiple times a week, and we need to offer teacher feedback every time we're in there. When I got to Canyon City in 2015, the wonderful thing about this was I knew what this would look like as we began. When we started doing it, teachers would freak out. That's what they did in Center. By about Thanksgiving, there would almost be an insurgence. Teachers running to school board members saying, make it stop, make it stop. They come in all the time and they're telling, and I feel like I never do anything right. They're always telling me things I need to do better, so on and so forth. And in fact, in Canyon City, I had my board president come to me saying, teachers are saying, make it stop. And I said, Mr. Neer, wait until January. Here's what you're going to be hearing. Teachers are going to be pointing to principals who aren't in there enough, because they start to see that the feedback they're being offered is actually helping them bring about greater achievement for students. And we have created a culture from 2015 to 2018 in Canyon City schools where teachers, on average, appreciate folks being in their classroom, telling them what they're doing well, telling them what they could do better, and reaping the benefits of the improved achievement that comes from that. Last bullet I have here, well, I'll go back to being a triathlete. You want to complete an Ironman triathlon, even though you weigh 220 pounds and are kind of old, and I did in 2013, have a hip that's heading towards needing an operation. Build a plan and follow it religiously. Do your training every day. How does that apply to this? If there's scientifically proven information as to what you can do to analyze a child's needs, and you can deliver the medicine in the form of the intervention and the quality first instruction, all you got to do is make sure you do it. And if you do it, if you make sure you do it with fidelity, I guarantee you'll get better results.
George, Tom here again. Looking at those results and obviously seeing the amazing growth over time, just backing up a little bit to the Haskin experience, I really can't underscore enough the leadership perspective that you and your team took in terms of laying out the expectation for your staff. You mentioned earlier about being a fan of Lindamood-Bell and our methodology, and of course we obviously feel that's very important, but really I think setting the tone and what stood out for us was that expectation for your staff, doing that root cause analysis. Can you just speak to that a little bit? How did you go from that root cause analysis, getting the truckloads of money that you talked about earlier, to the results? What happened in between? What did you do in between there as a leadership team?
Well, what I like to talk about that, and if you were to think about that chart, and what the heck, I'm going to just go back to it real quick because this is an indicator. This chart that shows all those school districts and schools that participated in the Turnaround Improvement Grant during that first cycle in Colorado, and the vastly different results that we got in Center at Haskin Elementary School. Here's my observation. What we knew in Center was we're going to have 3 years to learn a lot. We have a lot to learn. And we know that after 3 years, these resources are going to be gone. And so we're going to roll up our sleeves. We're going to get in there as administrative leaders and learn the processes. And then we're going to hold our folks accountable for doing the things that we've been taught to do. And when the money does stop, we're going to be left with something you can't take away from us. And that's the skills to make this work. And I don't know what your system looks like for folks who are viewing this, but I've seen some systems where they say, oh, we've got problems. We qualify for a grant. Well, thank you for the money. And now we're going to hand it to these people and they're going to fix us. If you have any belief that someone external from your system can fix you, my answer to you is maybe they will for a year. But they're not going to fix you long term. And you know, something I'm very proud of about the Haskin experience is that about 90% of the staff that earned bottom 5% school in Colorado honors was there when we got that school performance framework that showed we were performance. And here's what else I can tell you. I hope that makes you tingle, because I was just doing that again. I've had none of those resources coming into Canyon City Schools, none of them to this point, except those resources that I was able to internalize through my learning and my dedication to making sure you follow your workout plan, you follow your diet, you follow, you do the scientifically proven work with fidelity, and you get the results.
One other question I had as well, you talked a little bit about the Summer Academy, and I know a lot of the focus there was obviously getting more intervention time for kids, struggling readers that needed it, but also a focus on the professional development standpoint of that. How did both families and staff take that, the kind of that dual focus on student intervention and professional development?
The good thing about having gone through it a second time, I didn't know what I was into the first time, and our assumption was, okay, we've trained these teachers, and now they're going to perform the interventions with our kids, and this is going to change everything. And by the way, as you could see in the chart that shows what Haskin did after year one, the 41% performance in 2012, that Summer Academy helped a bit. But of course, it was the work we did all year and after school that was the game changer for the first year. And so going through that again in Canyon City, what I learned to communicate to my staff was this: Summer Academy is not about the kids. Summer Academy is about the adults that we've trained in the process. And will we get a bump out of the kids? Maybe, maybe not. Let's not panic. The bump we want to get is in the ability of our instructors, whether a certified teacher or a classified paraprofessional who's instructional, that they are getting better at implementing the process. And given enough time and support and becoming expert at the process will bring about the result.
Thank you again, George. Looking at your experience in both districts and just seeing the fantastic growth and hearing about really your takeaways and best practices, I think that is inspiring. I'm certainly inspired and proud to be part of a little bit of what you did there in Haskin and in Canyon City. I want to take this last few minutes and share a couple of questions or pose a couple of questions to you that we commonly get from our school partners and people looking to do something more comprehensively with their professional development plan. I think probably one of the biggest questions we get, or most common questions certainly, is from a fidelity standpoint, how do you protect that intervention time? We know the research points to a more intensive intervention for struggling readers, but within your curriculum, within your standards-based instruction, how do you carve out that intervention time and protect it?
Easy answer. It goes back to, where do you rank teaching a kid to read in terms of the things you ought to be doing in a school district? When we had our first round of training here in Canyon City, that's 2 summers ago, one of the great aspects of the training is the closeout day. There's literally half a day for discussion. What do you think? What are your greatest hopes? What are your greatest fears? And also troubleshooting is, how do we carve this time out for kids? And you have the social studies teacher, the science teacher, the PE teacher, the music teacher saying, I am not comfortable with you pulling this kid out of, my content area to administer this intervention. And my answer to that is, Lindamood-Bell is not a life sentence. It's at best a year sentence if done well. And at the 3rd grade level, wouldn't it be worth 60 minutes to 90 minutes a day of intervention to take a kid, and I've got a picture on my phone of this result, to take a kid from the 8th percentile in comprehension after 78 hours of instruction to the 92nd percentile in comprehension. Anything they missed in any of those other subject areas, as far as I'm concerned, they can catch up on. In fact, they can catch up on that in their spare time, because now they can access the materials and explore that learning on their own if they want to. But we'll catch them up. And so once again, it's about whether you make this a priority or not, if you ask me.
Next question, with obviously limited resources that most school districts are faced with, from a sustainability standpoint, how are you planning ahead when, let's say, early literacy grants run out, or other funding sources, or when you have staff that you invest professional development in and that staff turns over time?
Yeah. That's a great question, and the reality is it's hardest to start. And we started in Canyon City schools at a time where we had very limited resources. We've had a couple of cool things happen since we stuck our toe in the water, and I hope you don't mind me sharing this, but what I actually had to do when I got here, and certainly having had the quality partnership from the past, and I think belief on Lindamood-Bell's side that, hey, if Mr. Welsh's district starts this thing, they're going to do it right. I actually worked with you guys and asked for like a 3-year financing process to get us started, because the startup costs are big. Why are the startup costs big? That first bout of training, the getting people within your system to the point where they can support other people within your system, sort of that trainers piece. The purchase of the materials, is a pretty big expense as well. And having experienced what I did in center, the costs up front were a lot larger than the costs in year 3. And then when the grant was over in year 4 and 5 and so on, because once you have that core group of people who have mastered this work, you get what every school district gets. Some people leave, retire, new people come in, and just the maintenance level of getting other people in on training is quite affordable. I guarantee you're doing some other form of professional development in your district for the same kind of cost of money that doesn't give you the same kind of impact. So the hard part is committing to go into it. And the story that part of the story I guess I left off was, well, Colorado passed this thing called the Rural Sustainability Act last year, and that gave us a decent chunk of dollars to invest in new curriculum resources. But we put the first $150,000 in that into year 2 and year 3, our year 2 and year 3 agreement with Lindamood-Bell, so we knew we could train teachers, purchase the supplies we need for them to use in their groups and classes, and to continue to move forward. But going out further, maintenance is pretty simple as long as you attend to training those new staff members who come in, and you continue to support those expert staff members you've developed to constantly hone their skills and support other people within your system.
Great, thanks, George. I think that's about all the time we have for questions. We do have our contact information for both George and myself here. We weren't able to field a number of questions in this format today, but we certainly welcome questions if you'd like to email either of us, and we can have direct conversations with you about any specific questions on anything you heard today. You can also call us at our 800 number if you have any questions on our professional development services. And as a reminder, you can join us for our next Leaders in Literacy webinar, which will be scheduled this fall. Come back to the website for details, which should get posted within the next month or so for details on that. And we will be also launching a Lindamood-Bell radio podcast, which will also have unique perspectives in the world of literacy and learning. So you can check out our website for information on that. George, again, thank you so much for sharing your amazing and inspiring stories. Love to hear it. And thank all of you for attending. We really appreciate your time, and have a great day.